Thanks for joining today. We're going to talk about prepping your applicant site. Basically just go through all the ways that you can get the most out of GoSmart when you're thinking about all the pieces of your site that don't have to do with your grant opportunity. So some things to think about right away. When your applicants visit your GoSmart site, they should feel like it's an extension of your website as much as they can. So we want you to use your branding, your logo, your colors. You want to make sure that you're creating language that provides the applicants with clear and succinct information on how best to use your site. So any place where you can be adding custom language is what we're going to peek at today to make sure that you are not only familiar with what it looks like to your applicant, but also with the best ways for you to include information to guide them through the process. And really just want to make sure that there's no tools that have been overlooked either during your training or in the years that you've been working in the site. And just as a tip, I would recommend that you navigate your applicant site as an applicant every once in a while, maybe when you create a new grant opportunity, or maybe once a year, just do a little hop through the applicant site and move through the workflow as an applicant would, just to ensure that you're covering everything. All right. So some things to think about when you're preparing your applicant site. There's a guide that I'm going to show you in just a second that also covers sort of like a 5-point steps to make sure that you've covered that. Those are really things you want to cover before you even invite folks to your GoSmart site. So again, many of you would probably be beyond that point, but again, just something good to keep in mind that those 5 things are always updated. Talk about some custom language, how to include the text editor that we went over last month. We'll talk really briefly about the work sample tool because one of our next couple webinars is going to cover that in depth, but just want to make sure it's forefront of everyone's mind. We'll talk about site aesthetics, your background color and your logo. We'll talk a little bit about status and mass mailers, which is also a piece that doesn't really have to do with the grant opportunity and may easily be overlooked when you're sort of wrapping everything up on that build. And then the last thing we'll talk about is naming convention. All right, so the guide, as I said, is going to be available to you on the knowledge base, and I can share this slideshow and these links, but everybody should have access to our knowledge base. And one of the sections is best practices, where you can find this guide called Preparing Your Applicant Portal. And you'll see that it really covers these 5 main points: the welcome message that your folks will see when they first get to your applicant site, the work sample module that you'll set up right beneath the welcome message, the background color and logo, and then from the front-end manager, you want to make sure that you tie up any navigation pages and that you get your custom registration settings in order. But again, that's the kind of stuff that you really want to make sure you have in place before you even invite applicants to your site, but can always use a refresh and a new eye every once in a while. So diving right in, let's talk about some custom language opportunities. So the first place that you'll be able to make that custom language is the home or welcome message. And wanted to do a little side-by-side. On most of the slides here, we're going to see our admin portal, our admin site in the background, and our applicant site in the foreground. So from our admin site, we'll be on administration and agency editor. And the first text field you'll see is agency message. And that, again, is what shows up here on your applicant site when they're on the home screen. Whether they're logged in or not, they're going to see this message. So make sure that you're giving them enough information to understand where they are, what you want from them, but you never want to overload folks too much with a little bit too much data here. We always recommend making some navigation pages that we'll talk about in a second if you want to give them some really critical information that they need before they hop into an application. But from here, you want to kind of jazz it up as much as you can, so always remember to use the text editor tools that we learned about last month. Add some good font and some good color. Make sure to link to items. Throw in an image or two. And where you can, even include images on links. So we've created these custom buttons to log in and register that will also show up on top of the default language that usually shows up here if you're not logged in, that says, you know, register here or click login at the top. So always a good idea to just make this a little punchy because it's sort of your first impression. The next place you want to think about your custom language, as we said, was these navigation these navigation tabs. So you will create these from the Front-End Manager Navigation Editor, and these additional tabs will show up to the applicant just after the 4 default items. You can add them or not. If you don't add them, it won't appear like anything's missing, but again, we recommend building these types of pages if you have a little bit more in-depth information to throw in. And again, you want to make it visually interesting enough that your folks are going to read through it. You never want to spend too much time building all this text and then come to find out that people just aren't reading through it. Unfortunately, we know how short attention spans are with reading, even when people are asking for grant funding. So do what you can with the text editor tools and sort of crafting the page to make sure that it's something that people are actually going to read through. Okay. All right. So the next space to think about some custom language is in your program description and the message about program. So just as a reminder, these are 2 text fields that you're going to find on the Front-End Manager from the Program Cycle subtab when you're working on that editor and filling out the logistics of your cycle. About halfway through the page, you'll see that program description box, and then just beneath that is the message about program. And again, as a reminder, this shows up to the applicant when they're looking through their current programs and applications page. So they'll see the title of the cycle as you've given it here, but if you want to include a little bit more information while they're scrolling through this page, that's always a good idea. Now again, always remember, less is more. You want to give them the information they need to know if the grant opportunity is appropriate for them, but you don't want to include too much. In fact, there is probably a 500-character limit to these. So what we recommend is if at this level you really feel like people need to be reminded of the guidelines or something like that, we recommend that you link to the guidelines, whether they live on your CK editor, your text editor tool repository, or even if you build a navigation page here, you could link to either of those items. So again, just be really mindful of the language you're using here and make sure that what it's doing is allowing your applicants to understand just what they need to know about that opportunity. Is it right for them? Should they move on? All right. And then the last 2 sections where you might want to create some custom language is, again, from that Program Cycles editor. Further down the page, you're going to see 10 text fields. The first 5 are going to have the name of the item, whether it's draft review, application, interim report, and so on, followed by submission text. And that is the text that your applicant is going to see on the very last page of whatever item this is. Right now we're in the application. So they're going to see this submission text that you enter here. And we frequently see this left blank, which is perfectly fine. It is a pretty self-explanatory page. When folks get to the submit page, they will see, if you don't include text, they will see a final submission button or checkbox and a submit button. So pretty clear, they know what they're supposed to do here. But what we recommend is if you have any kind of language that they should see before they submit, before something becomes read-only and they can't edit it without talking to you first, any kind of direction you want to give them, we recommend you adding to these submission text fields. Now frequently these get confused for the confirmation text fields, which are the next 5 text fields on the page. The confirmation text is what they'll see just after they click submit. And this is really where you want to put that one-time pop-up message that's something very vague, but enough to reassure them that what they just submitted did in fact get received. So frequently it's something as simple as thank you for submitting, we'll be in touch with next steps. Now you never want to include here those actual next steps because this is a one-time pop-up message. So if it's something vital like here's what you need to do after you've submitted, make sure you call us or do whatever it is that you need them to do, you want to make sure it's something they can go back to. So we recommend that you, in those instances, make a status mailer, and we'll talk about that later, that includes those next steps so that they have a record of it, because this is going to be, as I said, just a one-time showing of this message. But you do want to put something here because if this field stays blank, what happens is the applicant clicks submit, and then they get navigated to this blank page, which if they've been in the system long enough, they know what that means. But for first-time users, they frequently are sort of left feeling like, okay, I click submit, now what? So always a good idea to add confirmation text to any item that you're including. Alrighty. So as I said, we'll talk pretty briefly about the work sample tools, but because it is such a dynamic tool, do just want to hit on it a little bit to make sure that if it's a tool you're using, you are including language and directions that will really help your applicants and your admin staff use these tools. So the first thing to recognize is that the work sample tools are going to be a two-step process for you as admin, and then a two-step process for the applicant. So from the admin point of view, the first step is setting up the work sample module items. When you're on your administration tab, agency editor sub-tab, just beneath where you've created your home message, that agency message, are three lengthy fields that start with work sample module. The first one is just work sample module, no appendage, and that's really where you're just going to turn off or on the ability for your applicants to upload this media. And remember that at the work sample module level, we're talking about the site-wide bank that your applicants use. This isn't at the application level. So we want to make sure that if you ever want to have your applicants include any media type throughout any application, then you want these items on. And typically we will have discussed that when you first set up your site. So by and large, you won't need to think about this much after that initial setup. But if, for instance, you've come on board with GoSmart and you initially did not want media, now it's a couple of years later and you realize you do want to get things like video or audio that you weren't previously using, just give us a call and we'll get you set up. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the work sample module storage, and that's where you're going to set your max file size and your max number of files. And again, that's affected when your applicant is in their Manage Work Samples tab. They'll see right here, this piece speaks to these items here, and it will say, here's how much space you have been allotted. Usually it's 250 unless you have a different deal with your contract. And then it'll also say how much space you have left. And then within each media type, depending on the max number of files and sizes you put here, there will also be more information to say you're only allotted, let's say, 10 items, 10 videos, you've uploaded 1, you have 9 spaces left. But you also only have 200 megabytes left because your first video is 50 megabytes. So all that language sort of happens automatically. Now the language that doesn't happen automatically is the work sample module text. So this third piece of the work sample module settings on your agency editor is really where we want to focus to make sure that your applicants are getting the information they need to understand what this work sample tool is about. So we have some default text, and I'm happy to share that with you. It's also included here. So if you are going through this slideshow on your own, you can always click this module link here, and that will give you all of this HTML-coded text that you can throw right into these boxes. You're also, of course, welcome to customize it and make it your own. Now, because it's at the site level, we rarely see folks get too specific anyway with this language because you're really going to get into specifics on your work sample page. So mostly the language that we provide, that default language, is going to work for everybody. But again, you're totally welcome to make it your own. So that's the first step of using the work sample tool, is setting up these three pieces of the work sample module on your agency editor. The second step, as I've mentioned, is using the actual work sample select page within an application or interim report or final report. So when you pull in that page, you'll remember on your side when you're filling it out, it's going to look like two text fields where you include your own instructional text. You can also add additional information here. And just to go over a little bit, because I think I've seen it misused a little, the sample ordering instruction shows up beneath the dynamic buttons where the applicant actually selects their pieces. It shows up closer to the bottom of the page to the applicant, and it's really to be used if you want your applicant to reorder the items that they've attached. So let's say that you want to make things really easy for your panel. You want everybody's 501c3 to be the first thing, you want everyone's driver's license to be the second thing, and you want everyone's work to be the following items. You would put that language in this second box, and then that lives right above where they're able to toggle the sequence and change the order. So frequently we see this box left blank, which is totally fine, because unless you want things reordered, there's no reason to put language there. However, this first box, this info instruction box, is vital for your folks to understand how to use the rest of the page. Because what they'll see on their side, if you remember, is your information, and then they'll start to see these buttons about either going to the image bank or making their selection. So what we've done is also created some default language, and again, it's included here. So if you open up this document, you can just copy and paste right into here, and then follow that up with your own custom list of what it is you're looking for. All right. And then just briefly want to remind you that though what we just talked about was the 2 steps for the admin, the 2-step process for the applicants is going to be uploading items to that Manage Work Sample bank, and then second, attaching it on this page that we're looking at here. So again, it can be sort of daunting for newer applicants, and so we have tutorials and videos that walk them through using specifically this tool. All right. The next piece, which is pretty easy to get through, but we find to be so important, is talking about the site aesthetics. So as I mentioned at the beginning, what we really want is for you to be able to make this appear to be an extension of your own website. So from the agency editor again, all the way at the bottom, below the work sample module items, you're going to see this template layout section. And from here, you can choose your background color. You can either click on this square and it'll give you a color palette to manually choose from, or hopefully your branding, your marketing department has included some hex codes for the colors that they're using, and you can just type that right into here, and then you'll see that color appear. And as you've noticed, that background color shows up on all portals, so it's going to show up to your applicants, to your admin, and to your panelists, and it's going to show up outside of all of the text boxes. And then the second thing you want to think about is your agency logo. And remember that this just shows up to your applicants. When you're logged in as an admin, you'll see our GoSmart logo, but your applicants will see this. And we really recommend that you try to use a PNG file. Those typically do not have a background, so it'll blend really nicely with your color rather than putting a white box bounding your logo. But of course, you're welcome to do whatever works for you. If you also want us to participate in that, we'd be happy to help. If you say, look, I've got the color and I've got a logo, they're not working great together, if you want to shoot us that hex color and that logo, we're happy to punch it up for you. Okay. All right. The next thing that you want to, again, sort of have in place before you get going, but could always use a fresh set of eyes every couple years or so, is your registration. So from the customized from the customized profile subtab of the front-end manager, you can turn on or off some optional items that are going to show up to your applicants on their profile page when they register. Now, 2 things I want to point out. When you're setting up your site with a GoSmart member, usually you're deciding if you're an NEA agency or basically anything else, which we're calling NEH. If you are an NEA agency, then you report to the NEA, and that setting puts a couple of things at play. It adds some demographic questions to your registration page. So if your setting is set to NEA, you might notice that down the page further, questions like institution type, race, artistic discipline are asked here. If that does not jive with your application pool, if you should not be asking those questions of everybody, and you also do not report to the NEA, let us know and we can turn off that feature so that your applicants are not giving you information that you don't want. But turning off the NEA also changes some other items of the site, so just make sure to have that conversation with the GoSmart team if you're thinking about changing your setting from NEA to NEH. Another thing that might change what the profile registration page looks like is whether or not you have enhanced profile on. If you are an agency that is allowing your applicants to designate themselves as an individual or an organization, then you have the enhanced profile on. And that means that any of these 9 items, are available to you. And when you toggle between display and make required, this will all automatically work exactly as you'd expect. Now, if you have your enhanced profile turned off because you wanted all of your applicants to just be one type of user, many of these will be unavailable to you and will need to be asked within the application. So even though this page will look like it's active, it'll look like you're able to toggle these items, you'll note when you go back to preview a registration page that what you've got set here might not be showing up here, and that's because you might not be enhanced profile. So again, if you have any questions about that, let us know. We'll walk you through it, and we'll make sure that you have the right agency settings when you're ready to go. And then lastly, remember that all of this registration information gets pulled into every PDF of the application, the interim report, the final report. So there's no need to ever ask for this information within the application or report if you've gathered it on the registration page. Okay, and then the last little piece we'll talk about from this side is the status and mass mailers. So as I talked about, these would be a really great opportunity if you either need to create some kind of confirmation message that goes out to your applicants via email, or if you need to create an immediate email that goes out to all the applicants of one or more statuses. So from the Grant Manager tab, you'll see the status mailer will allow you to create a message that you can save for any further use, and depending on the status that you select for it, a confirmation message will go out immediately when that status is met. So we see frequently people will create one for the received status, because as soon as somebody submits the application, the system automatically puts them in received, and then if you've created a status mailer, it knows to send that received message, or I'm sorry, it knows to send that message that is coordinated to the received status. You can create one for every status. You cannot create more than one per status because the system only will know to send something based on a status. So if you have more than one created, you're going to send multiple emails when that status is met. And then the mass mailer, you'll note, has a little bit different of a look. You're going to be met with the status table first, and you'll choose the statuses of the people to whom you want to send the message. So frequently we'll see people come in, they'll check off the folks in progress, and they'll send them a letter that says, by the way, or just a reminder, our deadline is in a week. Make sure that you spend the next 7 days getting in the system and finishing up your work. Again, you can use these however you see fit, but just a reminder, you want the status mailer in place as soon as you think folks are going to be accessing your grant opportunity. Okay, and then a little piece that frequently goes sort of unconsidered is the naming convention. So as you are creating your programs and your program cycles, try to keep some of the following in mind. It's wonderful for your benefit as the admin, but it's also good for your repeat applicants. When they come back every year and they know that they're looking for the same sort of naming convention, it's so much easier for them to find what they're looking for. So some things to think about, some do's: keep your program titles short: community support, project support, fellowship. The shorter the better. Name your program such that your cycles within that program will use that name. So if your program is community support, it would make sense that your cycles are community support 2017, community support 2018. If your cycle names are totally unrelated to your program names, maybe have a conversation with us and let's talk about why they're not jiving, why they have such an unusual naming convention, and see if there's a way that we should be renaming one or the other. And then the last thing you definitely want to do is keep your naming scheme the same every year. So if you do Community Support 2017 this year, don't do FY18 Community Support next year. And to follow up on some other don'ts, don't include the agency name, the words grant or application, or the date in the title of a program. Your programs should never have a year on them or a quarter, because what should be inside of those programs are the cycles with the year or the quarter. You never want to take up space with the word grant or application or opportunity. Your folks know that's what they're looking at. They're looking at an opportunity or an application. Now, this might not come into play, or you might have to treat it differently if, let's say, you've made a cycle that is a one-off thing, like a reimbursement request, or let's say it's really peculiar and you're just offering a final report where you didn't offer an application, then it would make sense to have the word final report in your cycle name. But otherwise, you really want to leave it very broad, but just tie it into sort of the time range, the designated time that you're offering that opportunity. Talked about how you don't want to name your programs and cycles differently. Make sure that community support runs through it all if that's your program name. Don't put cycles in programs to which they don't apply. So if you have, again, sort of a one-off item and you feel like it goes in community support, but we didn't do it last year, we probably won't do it next year, but let's just throw it in there, you should definitely make it its own program and then call it that program plus that cycle year. And then again, make sure that you're not changing where and how you append your cycle designation. So like I said, don't call this year Community Support 2017 and call next year FY18 Community Support. If you start with the year at the end, you want to always keep every year with the year at the end. If you always start with FY18 Community Support, then you always want to follow that convention. So again, there's another guide that sort of walks you through all this stuff from the knowledge base, and you can always reach that from this link as well. All right, so I know that might have felt like some disjointed things, but again, just want to make sure that it is sort of those items that might go overlooked because they are sort of hidden throughout as you're working on the other bigger pieces like the opportunity itself. So hopefully, again, if you even just look at the second page of this slideshow, maybe every time you sort of recreate a new application, it'll give you a good 8 to 10 steps. Have I done this? Have I done that? Awesome. Well, great. Well, so yeah, I'll share this with you, and this basically has everything you need. But if you ever are not in this slideshow and feeling like you're working on stuff, always head to the knowledge base, gosmart.org/knowledge_base, and there's an applicant site setup section that has specifically everything we talked about here, and then there's a best practices section where those guides are. So if you've ever misplaced this slideshow, you still have all of that stuff at your fingertips. And then, of course, always get in touch with me if you need anything.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining today. Have a great holiday.